Welcome everybody to Yoga Philosophy Group, coming to you from the Yoga Center of Chico. I'm Lauren Carley, and with me is Tom Hess. In this series, we are studying the Bhagavad Gita and how it can relate to your life. We use this translation by Eknath Easwaran. I'm sure I got it up right side up, but you can use whatever translation you have or whichever one you like. I'm honored now to introduce our presenter and owner of the Yoga Center of Chico, Tom Hess.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to I guess it's our 6th meeting of the Bhagavad Gita study group, and we're working on chapter 5 of the Gita. And the title of it in Eknath Easwaran's version is called Renounce and Rejoice, Sanyasa Yoga. Well, I think the first thing that needs to be looked at, what does this word Sanyasa mean? It means renunciation. It means it's a description of a type of a yoga practitioner who renounces the world and goes in solitude to seek their true self. So that's sort of the title of the book, of the chapter. So Arjuna first starts out the chapter asking Krishna which of the 2 yoga paths that Krishna has described in chapters 2 and 3 are the better of the practices. Okay, so in chapter 2, titled Samkhya Yoga, Krishna described the yoga of renunciation. Well, this is the same yoga that the sannyasi would partake of. This is the same yoga of the jnana, the yoga of contemplation or meditation. It's also the style of yoga that's prescribed under the Patanjali's teachings, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's also the style of yoga that if you're an Iyengar yoga practitioner or a deep meditator, you would be inclined to move towards this focused meditation, single pointedness. It's the yoga of renunciation, and it's described in chapter 2, called Samkhya Yoga. The other type of yoga that he's comparing to is the yoga of action, or karma yoga. The yoga of action is the practice of not having any expectation of rewards for the actions that one does. And it's a change of attitude. It's a change of how we value what we do. Okay, so these are the 2 styles of yoga as described in chapter 2 and chapter 3. Chapter 4 was talking about jnana yoga, which is a lot like the yoga of renunciation. So Krishna says the better of the 2 is the yoga of action. Okay, why? Why is the yoga of action better than the yoga of renunciation? Well, the yoga of action can be done by everybody. You don't have to get off into the forest. You don't have to sit in austerity and focus the mind and live on next to nothing for whatever. Everybody can do the yoga of karma, the yoga of action. It only involves, you do the same things you do in life. You just change your expectation. So the things that I do in life, or we do in life as yoga practitioners, we don't get attached to the results. We don't get, it's a little bit of greedy. We don't get greedy for a result. We do our dharma. Remember dharma? We talked about that in the first few chapters. We do our dharma in the world without an expectation of success or failure. The only requirement is that we do it as best we can and then let go of the results. This is the yoga that Krishna is telling Arjuna is the superior of the 2. The reason being, it can be done by everybody, every householder. And frankly, it's more available to more people than the yoga of renunciation. Not everybody can leave the world. Okay. But then after Krishna talks about that the yoga of action is better than the yoga of renunciation, he goes on to explain that they both lead to the same destination, the true self. Now, the yoga of action, the way that you find the true self in the yoga of action, or the yoga of selfless service. Remember that term? We ran into that second chapter, selfless service, is when you do your service, you eventually see the self in all beings. You see their essence. And when one sees that in all beings that one does service towards, it helps them see the self within themselves. That is the goal. The service towards others is the means of karma yoga. In Jnana yoga or Samkhya yoga, you go, or the yoga of renunciation, you go for the single-minded focus that leads you to the self within. You start to go through life not attached to the comings and goings, the expectations, the results of all that goes on around you. Everything that your senses bring to you, you're to avoid. Not avoid, not get attached to, is what I mean. So both of these methods, in these different ways, have the same destination, the understanding and seeking of the true self. Krishna has just told Arjuna that the better of the two for the common man, for the average person, is the yoga of action, because we all have to act in the world. Even the yogi who's renounced, he has to act, he has to exercise, he has to eat, he has to do things, he has to sit and meditate, his internal organs are moving. We all act all the time. So anybody that says that they don't act aren't seeing the reality of life. Then Krishna goes on to talk about the senses of perception, how we see, touch, taste, feel, and that these senses are, he's describing the wise man now. What is the wise man? The wise man is the one who sees the self within. In whatever method, they see the self within. The wise man doesn't get attached to the perceptions that their senses bring to them. So I see something. It brings me information into my mind. I like it, I dislike it, I'm neutral about it, doesn't matter. The wise man, the enlightened man, doesn't get attached to the sense input. So it's like they create a barrier around themselves, not being influenced by the normal sensory inputs from the world around them and in their own self. You learn to control the senses as a true yogi. Okay. Then he then describes or compares the enlightened. Well, let's not use that word enlightened yet. Let's wait on that. I like the word the wise man. He describes the wise man and compares it to the leaf of a lotus. The leaf of a lotus is such a texture that when a drop of water falls on it, it does not become absorbed. It rolls up, much like a duck's back with water. Okay, this is how Krishna describes to Arjuna the wise man's path. He has these sensory inputs from the world, but he lets them roll off his back just like water off a duck's back, and don't get influenced by them positively or negatively. And then he stays within himself. And that's then when he starts to talk about the city of nine gates. The city of nine gates is a reference to the human form. The gates are the openings of the body, the two eyes, the two nostrils, the mouth, the ears, the anus, and the genitals. These are areas of openings in the body. So it's, I don't know where the phrase came from, but the city of nine gates is a reference to the wise person who can close these gates off to the outside world and be within oneself for two reasons. Number one, to not be influenced by the good and the bad and the ups and the downs of the world outside, and not be influenced by the wishes and dreams or attachments or aversion within oneself, and can then lead to the true self within. So the wise man closes these nine gates, and oftentimes this is done in a meditative state. much of this inner work is done in a meditative state. Then Krishna talks a little bit about the differentiation between nature and the Lord. So he talks about these actions of man, the cause and effect, the sense of acting. These things are part of nature. They are part of the natural functioning of the world around us, these actions. The Lord, Brahman, doesn't get attached to it. He stands back and watches it happen. He's enlightened, right? The Lord, Brahman, is what we consider the ultimate wise man. He does not get attached to the little things that happen in the world. He realizes, just like the wise realize, that these things are just passing fancies, not to be attracted to, not to be attached to. They will end at some point. He does not bother with evil and good judgments. It's all neutral. It's not good or bad. True wisdom comes from knowledge of the self within. When that person is wise, when that person understands the self within and recognizes the connection between themselves, their Atman within themselves, and the universal Brahman, that Lord, that essence out there, when one comes to the Lord with this knowledge within, it's a uniting, it's a connection, it's a melding. That is when rebirth doesn't happen. When one no longer has any attached karma, bringing them from one life to the next, samskaras, these emotional attachments that the wise people, the wise men have put away. When one is free of all of those elements of attachment, one then can unite with Brahman. If we go in this life with these attachments, with these karmas, with these samskaras, we will get reborn again in an effort to free our future selves of the burden of karma and samskaras. So that's what the wise look like when they get that. When one has this knowledge of the true self through meditation, I'm talking about deep meditation, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, the last three petals of yoga, the last 8 limbs of yoga, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. These are the practices that leads one to the true self. Okay, when they have gone through that process of the last 3 limbs of yoga, deep meditation, uniting with the world, they live in abiding joy. They live their life. There's an innate joyfulness in the enlightened being, in that they're not attached to anything that might draw them into a state of negativity. They see the true self, they're united with Brahman, and this connection is what enlightens them, is what unites them with Brahman. That's the sign of a true wise man. The pleasures of the world will end. They bring misery, because every of the pleasures that we have in life will come to an end. In and of that end, it might be a big misery, it might be a little misery, it's still a negative misery. Okay, so this is why the wise man doesn't even get attached to the pleasures of the world. They might partake of the pleasures of the world, but not get attached to them, not make them habitual, not live their life around them. The other attributes of the wise or the enlightened is they tend to help others. It's like one gets a blessing upon oneself, and one recognizes that this blessing is rare, very rare. And it's part of the responsibility of the path is to share it. And they go about sharing it in whatever form or method they choose to do that, they do that. And within that sharing, they share that connection to Brahman, and that it's that essence that we all connect with. The wise have no anger. They have no selfish desire. They're unified in their mind. They're centered. Those who realize the self are established in that state. And what that means is there are plenty of instances along this spiritual path where you get glimpses of the end product, glimpses of detachment, glimpses of lightness. It's different with the wise. They're established in it. It never leaves them. Their abode is that state of contentment and joy that realization of the true self has brought them. So that little glimpse of joy we find every once in a while, imagine if it was with us all the time, everywhere. That's the state of the wise man or the enlightened soul. Meditation masters the senses, which leads to self-realization, which leads to the goal of yoga, that knowledge of the self within. So that's basically the 5th chapter, and it's sort of a culmination of the previous 4 chapters leading to a decision. The decision that Krishna has made is the yoga of action is superior to the yoga of renunciation, but if you follow both paths, they still lead to the same goal, that understanding of the true self within. So thank you, and I look forward to continuing the journey with you. Lauren?
Thanks, Tom. Well, as far as the practices for chapter 5, I also look at this as a good time to review and consolidate. So the chapter may be called Renounce and Rejoice, but I'll title this Review and Consolidate. I have a few suggested practices for you, or ways to review and consolidate as we go through the chapters 1 through 5. Number 1 is you might take time to review the terms and the concepts behind the terms that we started with in chapter 1. I have had at least one participant talk about a cheat sheet. So a practice might be to make your own cheat sheet. Number 2 is take a little time to ask yourself, where are you with the war within? Just leave that there. Where are you with the war within? Continue to practice self-observation, which is a lot of what Tom just talked about. Observe your ability to detach, observe your ability to detach from certain things. Some things are easy to detach from, some things are not, and so on. So continue the practice of Savadheya and observe yourself. The next suggestion is continue the practice, speaking of which, continue the practice of detachment along with the related selfless service. And keep in mind, wisdom, this is a quote, wisdom is the goal of selfless action, knowing is the fruit of doing. That's S41 and Gita verse 4:33, chapter 4, verse 33. Wisdom is the goal of selfless action, knowing is the fruit of doing. Exactly what Tom was talking about. And in the end, everybody is doing, and the goal of doing, if you can shift your mindset, the goal of doing is to get the fruit of knowing, wisdom. And lastly, I'm going to throw in the self-reflective question, where are you with the unity of your consciousness? Where are you with the unity of your consciousness? You might answer that for yourself. And the reason I bring that up is this starts coming up back in chapter 2. It's dotted throughout chapter 2, maybe some hints of it in chapter 3, but it really hits hard in chapter 4, and particularly chapter 5, the unity of your consciousness. So with that, Tom, I'll pass it back to you and for a wrap up.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, that's it. We're going to have our meeting tomorrow night. I guess that's the 28th. And I encourage us all to continue to study. And more important than study, I think, as Lauren has been talking about, try to see us in the Gita in us. How do we integrate this great philosophical work within our lives? How do we compare to Krishna and Arjuna? What can we learn from Krishna? What can we learn from Arjuna? So be self-reflective, and thank you. And I look forward to continuing. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.